Hello, everyone, and welcome to Can I Teach It, the 2022 edition. This is in conjunction with the Comics in the Classroom 2022 virtual conference put on by Reading with Pictures, with a special thanks to Pixton. So for some introductions, again, my name is Adam Ebert. I am an educator, an English educator from the South Side of Chicago. I've been an educator for 8 years, and for each of those 8 years, I've used comics and pop culture in my classroom. I am a founding member of the LitX Educational Cohort, and I have a YouTube series that is called Can I Teach It, that explores the teachability of pop culture across mediums, and obviously influences a little bit of what we're doing here. Some of our guests here, we have Adan Alvarado. Adan, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Just secondary ed teacher on the South Side of Chicago, and that's it. So that's my intro.
All right. And we also have Michael. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I teach English, secondary ed English in Rhode Island. I've been teaching for 19 years. I am also another co-founder of LitX with these two fine gentlemen here. I'm the director of programming for Rhode Island Comic Con, and I am the director of secondary education for Reading with Pictures.
All right, very nice. So our basic premise here, what we're going to be talking about is each of us will have two books, very recent books from 2022, and we will be exploring not only, telling you all a little bit about what these books are about, but how we might bring these into either pre-existing or into some new units, and what students might be doing with that book specifically. So we'll start us off with Adan's first book. Go ahead.
All right, so we're going to be taking a look at Talk to My Back. This is a manga by Murasaki Yamaha. This is essentially a collection of vignettes that focuses on the day-to-day of a young mother and wife, Chiharu Yamakawa, and just kind of what she goes to on her day-to-day basis, taking care of her children, taking care of her husband, cooking, cleaning, and also making these really interesting dolls. The story is pretty basic in that sense, but the larger message obviously is one of kind of self-exploration and emancipation under these sort of really difficult, circumstances. In this time in Japan, and I guess still to this day, and here in the States as well. A homemaker didn't have, quite the freedom to explore, who she wanted to be and kind of, self-actualize the way that we all hope just as people. And she's trying to find a way to still do that despite the circumstances she finds herself in. So it's really interesting. Again, just a lot of vignettes. It's not a cohesive, larger story. It's just a lot of different small stories about what she goes through on a day-to-day basis. A unit that I think I'd use it in, that I hope to use it in the future, is just kind of any kind of basic feminist unit, any unit that you may be exploring authentic identities, and even a little bit kind of more specific would be something that a unit where you're focusing on this kind of practical optimism, this idea of staying positive and maintaining hope, even when everything around you kind of is telling you perhaps you shouldn't, and kind of finding these sort of smaller moments, these smaller victories within a kind of largely oppressive circumstance. And that's kind of what the main protagonist does here. She knows that this is essentially her life. It's not something like Chopin's The Awakening, where she's going to, abandon the life that she's living, but in search of her, most authentic self. Instead, it's more of how can she find her most authentic self within the hand she's been dealt. And again, she does this through the creation of these dolls that she takes, a lot of pride in. And each of these dolls are kind of representative of these different lives that she kind of hoped for herself, that she obviously doesn't get to live and doesn't get to explore And while I guess that could be perceived as sad, and maybe it is, I kind of found a lot of hope in it, that we often don't get to just change the circumstances in which we live. I think we all kind of can empathize with that, whether it's, on a macro level, the world in which we are a part of that we wish was different, or maybe it's just individual circumstances on a micro level. But sometimes there are just things that are out of our control, and we have to find ways to kind of deal with it and push forward, and still kind of find those moments for us, and discover who we are within those circumstances. And I think this is an interesting work to do just that. I guess what else I would say about it is, you could pair it with a couple other texts if you're using it in a unit. Perhaps, specifically we're going kind of a feminist unit. I think the works of like Edna St. Vincent Millay or even Dorothy Parker would be interesting. Sort of pairing the poetry of those artists. You could use like a short story. Jamaica Kincaid's Girl would work well, and just kind of laying out expectations and perhaps, a desire to kind of maybe push back against those. But a contemporary work I think would be great to kind of pair with this is Mary Gaitskill's The Other Place. That's told from, it's the polar opposite of these vignettes. Yamaha's work is very like quiet and very subtle, and Gaitskill's short story is kind of in your face, and it's told from the perspective of a male protagonist, and kind of the oppressive nature of males in general. But I think it would be a good juxtaposition to kind of put up against these vignettes that are presented in Talk to My Back. So with that, we were also asked to kind of come up with a mini assessment. I would just, I'm thinking about teaching or using this in my graphic novel and mangas course. So I would have the students just create a 4-panel vignette that conveys a complex perspective regarding identity or emancipation, or even, patriarchal oppression, if that's what they wanted to go with. I like the idea of using kind of small comics, having students create small comics. Not only could it allows them to sort of reflect on very complex concepts and ideas, but it also forces them to do so in a very, economical way. I think a lot of our students have difficulty being concise, and I think this is a good way to, to help them out with that. How can they express their thoughts on complex issues, but be short and concise about it? And I think you can do that. And I think this work proves that over and over with all these different vignettes. So that's Talk to My Back. I'm going to toss this over to Adam, so you talk a little bit about his work, or the work he's talking about.
All right, so yeah, my first book is called Step by Bloody Step, and the creative team there is Cy Spurrier and Mateus Bergara. The essential premise is that this is a wordless, dialogue-less piece, or at least the dialogue, while it is sparse, is in a language that is not anything that we can comprehend. Very, very short instances of dialogue, but we're not meant to understand it. So the majority of this graphic novel has no words and relies solely on the images, which I'll talk about more in just a moment. But the basic premise is we open on images of landscapes, and we eventually open on an image of this massive hulking armored figure holding in their hands what looks like a tiny child. And over the course of the story, as that child gets hurt, we find that child is growing. So, it is through the pain that they endure that they mature and grow. And through each of the 4 issues of this collected trade paperback, each of them find these 2 characters in different locations, very exotic locations, often ones that are filled either with wonder or danger, until they are heading towards a conclusion in which they encounter our antagonists, who sometimes the details are sparse, but sometimes the details are often so vivid and presented in a way that relies solely on the images, which is something I love in a variety of mediums. So definitely in terms of a unit focus, I would look at this as perhaps, an introductory course. Maybe, I teach a freshman level course, so I might be introducing students to different mediums of storytelling. And I might say, hey, here is a graphic novel that communicates its entire story without any kind of words. It does it entirely in a visual manner. So I might bring in Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, really just to give them that language, tell them a little bit about how a story can be communicated with no words, and then start to look where there are instances of that in other mediums, particularly film and animation, and looking at, again, what choices are the creators making to present us with this story. There are obviously several comics that have also done this. Sean Tan's The Arrival in particular is a standout, one that presents this alien, if not immigrant experience presented without language. I think really beautifully told. Step by step, obviously, does something similar in a way, but different. There's also, from way back, I believe in like the early 2000s, Marvel did a monthly initiative called Nuff Said, in which a lot of the issues were dialogueless or captionless. So maybe bringing in some of those more familiar books from, superheroes and such. So there are obviously instances where you can do that, but the places that I'll look in terms of stretching out into another medium are film and animation. Now, we can go to the earliest instances of film where we could look at silent film and look at how those stories are told through body language, through choreography, through blocking, through anything else the actors are doing and anything else the filmmakers are doing to tell their story without, maybe caption cards or title cards, but largely telling that without any kind of dialogue or other, information in the form of text. I think that, depending on which text you can choose, whether that is horror, whether that is the fundamentals and the canonical films from the silent era, I think would be great opportunities. The instance that I would love, which is a newer thing, is Genndy Tartakovsky's Primal, which is an animation series from just about 2019 and 2020, largely dialogueless. And again, looking at that in conjunction with something like Step by Bloody Step could be something really to see where two different mediums are embracing the visual heavy or solely visual storytelling that I think can be really powerful, and just, again, really hit on the strengths of these individual mediums. Now, obviously, as you explore what strictly visual storytelling can look like, I think where you eventually end is by having students create something like that. So, very similar to what Adan said, creating mini comics in which the stories and the narratives are told solely through images, or you can have students do something along the lines of a photo essay, or depending on your student's skill level, having them do short films that are, reminiscent of some of the silent era films that we might take a look at. So I think, again, always looking at the creative. Certainly, you can be analytical and have them do some writing on, how these stories are being told panel by panel, with particular focuses on close-ups or, what is happening in those panel transitions. But I often like to lean into having students synthesize something that is similar to what we've been studying and looking at in class. With that, I'll throw it over to Michael for his first book.
Yeah, so the first book I'm going to talk about is The Many Deaths of Layla Starr, by Ram V and Felipe Andrade. It's published by Boom Studios. My summary of the story is really not, it's really hard to summarize it in a tiny little space, but it is the story of Layla, who is actually the reincarnation of the Avatar of Death, who is sent to Earth in a mortal body to find the person that's going to create immortality and stop him. Unfortunately for Layla, they keep getting killed over and over again during the course of the book, and then resurrected during different stages of this person she's looking for, his life. She keeps coming back over and over again. And it's generally about how death learns to live, I guess, if I were to summarize it in a single sentence. But it's far more complex than that, I think.
Yo, that should have been a blurb on the cover, bro. That's pretty great. That's pretty great.
Yeah, this is a favorite of the LitX crew. We all read it together a while back and talked about it, and it's a book I put on my school summer reading list this year, because I felt like this would be a great graphic novel for students to kind of dig into. So, it's like I said, the artwork is fantastic. I have the book here. I don't know if it'll show up very well, but probably not because I have my blur on. But
Yeah.
yeah, I blurred out the background. So you'll have to buy the book to check out the artwork. The artwork is fantastic. The character designs are stellar. So it's a very visually appealing book. I think your students really like it. It took a little while to talk it up to some of my students. But once I did, it's a book that keeps getting borrowed from my classroom library. As far as unit focus goes, I think this would be a great, particularly when you have students like I teach seniors, and a lot of the units that I pull together and I teach have to do with like their identity as well as destiny and free will, the milestones in their life, choosing paths. That's kind of what we have here is we see two people's life that parallel, although one the main character's life is more of their development is more of an intellectual and a moral and a psychological development, whereas the other character, we see not only those types of developments, but we also see them jumping forward in time. So we see how the events of his past kind of come to play as he gets older throughout the course of the book. So it's a really great book if you're bringing together students to talk about like their own choices in life and where they see themselves every few years. There's, like I said, there are time jumps throughout the course of the book. And one of those cliched questions that we like to ask our students is like, where will you be in 5 years or whatever? We don't have to be that heavy-handed, but we could talk about how your choices impact your future and how, ultimately, when you look back on your life, you're hopefully looking back at the moments that may have not seemed at the time to be your favorites, but are, some things that you look back upon fondly. It's a pet peeve of mine as an educator when teachers or anybody tells my students, these are the best times of your life, enjoy them. They're the best times of your life, because it never really feels in those moments like when someone says that to you, that you really are having the best time of your life. And speaking from personal experience, high school was not the best time of my life. And it's really depressing to be told that, you better enjoy it because it's not going to get any better from here, right? This book kind of approaches that subject in some ways, by seeing, these characters not always in the best, they're not in the best places at those moments. But then when we experience a time jump and the character references those times in the past, the last time he saw Layla, there is a fondness to what he's seeing, but there's also a realism to that. So I think you could talk about destiny versus free will. You could talk about life milestones and choices with your students. It's a great place to start with students as icebreakers, to have them talking a little bit about themselves and their own goals. And this is where my assessment comes in. Students can create personal timelines of the crossroads they have encountered and maybe even extrapolate about the choices that they're going to make. Very often as high school teachers, I don't know how well this would fly with younger students, but I certainly probably wouldn't use this book with a middle school or elementary, certainly not elementary, maybe not so much middle school. So this is more of a high school book anyway. But you see, our kids are at crossroads. They're about to make major decisions in their lives, because what do they do after high school? Where do they go? And there's so many different options and possibilities. So having them look at their past, the way Layla kind of travels through the timeline of the character that she's following, having them look at their own past, and then consider their future. And you could do this in a number of ways. You could do it as simply as like, just kind of like milestone points on a simple timeline, or you could have them draw it, and create a mini comic or a series of panels where they draw moments in their lives where they felt like they made an important decision, and then the next moment and the next moment. So you could be creative, and you can decide how you want to kind of present this to your students. I personally like the drawing thing because I think kids very often, when they tap into that creative part of them, can become more insightful about, even their own experiences. So I keep trying to remember, some things I might pair this with. There's another comic, and guys, if you could help me out here, I can't for the life of me remember. There's a
Day
comic
Tripper.
Day Tripper. I knew it. See, I knew Don would have it. It was on the top of my brain. I couldn't reach it. But it's a great another book very much like that. But it's the book is very similar in that the main character, we see the character at his death, but his death as it occurs in different points in his life. So if he died at 18, if he died at 80, what would he be in his life, and what would his life have been up to that point? And so that's a really cool graphic novel that you could pair this with if you so chose. So with that, I'm not sure who's next, but I'm going to throw it to back to Adam, I think here. Oh wait, is this Adan or Adam?
Yeah,
and I'll throw it to Adan.
There you go.
I forgot who picked which one.
It's all good. It's all good. First, I would just like to say, because we're all homies, that I kind of just enjoy you as people. I often forget just how incredible of educators you both are, because those are both really good. I like a lot what you guys had to say. So dope. Y'all are lucky to have these dudes.
Right
talking
on.
about
Thank
these
you.
talking
Right
about
back
these
at you.
picks. We'll go into
Likewise, sir.
we'll go into acting class by Nick Darnaso. Nick Darnaso kind of jumped onto the scene with a book, Beverly, which is kind of this story told through vignettes. Got a lot of early like Chris Ware comps, but I think he's kind of established his own style for sure at this point. A couple years ago, he was the only graphic novelist to have been shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize for his work Sabrina, which was a tale about a woman who goes missing, and kind of the people around her dealing with the aftermath, trying to put together what happened to her. And it was a really compelling look at the time we were in 2018. This kind of world in which we were, this post-truth sort of world where things were just going on, and people would say things online, and they would just run with it, and you kind of didn't know what to trust anymore, and people were willing to believe anything. And he explores that in that work Sabrina, and I think to a certain degree, acting class is kind of a spiritual companion to that. I think in a way it builds off this idea that he began exploring a few years back, except he kind of, presents it in a new way. The quick rundown of the story. It's kind of interconnected stories centering around an acting class, a kind of community acting class, in which the person running the class, John Smith, is kind of tossing out some weird ideas, and and talking to each of the people who are taking the class. And he's clearly, a confidence or flim-flam man or charlatan or however you want to refer to him. And the things that he's saying to these individuals, are impacting them. First, it's impacting them, sort of in isolation, right? It's sort of self-contained within this acting class. But eventually those ideas begin to seep into other parts of their lives. To the point where this idea that is kind of tossed out of one of the characters being a green ogre, by the end is actually being presented as a green ogre in a lot of the panels. It's just this massive green ogre sitting in a room because, again, these seeds that were planted, get kind of first start growing in this class, and then again start growing in these individuals' lives outside. And it starts having a really impact on who they are as individuals outside of this acting class. And I think I said that this was kind of a companion to Sabrina in a way, because I think in Sabrina he's talking about, this this idea of, you know, factual relativism, right? This idea that, you know, truth is relative and there is no facts anymore. And, you know, ideas are tossed out and jumped on and then spread, and then those things eventually become fact because we choose to believe in them. And in acting class, he starts focusing a little bit more about how those things happen. Because I think we all get confused when we see people who kind of engage in these things and espouse these sort of ideas. And I think he's looking to explore how and why that takes place in this work. And at first, in acting class, it's again kind of contained, you know, to dark parts of the internet, we might say, or, you know, conspiracy theorists or Facebook groups. But as things continue, and these things are allowed to continue to exist and to grow, they start seeping into other parts of these characters' reality, and then it starts becoming a big problem. And I think it's an interesting work for our students to take a look at, particularly if we're kind of using it as a work for a media literacy unit, or even talking about, you know, having to deal with this new world we're living in, where people will try to, you know, pitch, you know, blatant lies as reality, right? Where they will try to convince one that their perception is enough to make reality, is enough to be facts, because it's how they feel and it's how they view things. And I think it's an important thing for us to discuss with our students as they operate in this world. So again, I think it'd be cool to have it as part of a media literacy unit, just kind of discussing to think critically about the things that we consume and how things are being presented. And I would like to have them, you know, if I could, it would be the assessment I have down is kind of maybe write a short story or a short film. Ebert and I, again, on the same link there, that makes use of like the Rashomon effect, just have them analyze their work, right? Have a story that's told from multiple perspectives, but then have them really dig into and analyze the perspectives that they put forward and kind of discuss whether those, while all those perspectives may be compelling, perhaps they're not all equal, and then really think about what's the truth that these characters that they've created, what they see and what they're living and the truth of it, and then also how they perceive it and how they present it when it comes down to it. I think it would just be an interesting exercise for them just to think about, you know, how things are viewed and how things are presented, and every single day, right? Every single day for them on a macro and micro level. Things that you could pair with it. Another graphic novel that would be obviously a little more reality based would be like something like The Influencing Machine, which kind of focuses more about how media itself, you know, the actual news media, and their, you know, and biases that exist with them. This one's obviously taking a little bit of a darker turn in acting class, because now we're moving beyond these sort of traditional means of manipulation into a whole new world. But I think The Influencing Machine would be interesting to look at. If you're looking at more, you know, canonical texts, or to use more canonical texts, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, or even 1984, you can kind of just explore this idea of, you know, forcing realities, right? Kind of taking these lies and forcing them to be a reality. I think those are two works that are interesting. But I also think Christopher Priest's The Prestige, a more modern work, would be interesting to look at. It's an epistolary novel, and it's these relatives trying to. Some of you may have seen the Nolan film, where there's these two magicians, and their relatives are trying to put together what happened, and they're doing it through these letters. And you can't really trust any of the letters that they're going through. So you get this very unreliable narrator, and I think that's essentially, you know, what's at the heart of acting class, right? It's this antagonist, who is this kind of confident / flim-flam man, who is crafting a narrative, which is what these individuals do, or these sort of organizations do. They are trying to craft the narrative that then becomes our reality. And I think it's interesting to sort of just take a look at that. So yeah, that would be a acting class. And I'm going to toss this now to Ebert for his second work.
All right, so my second pick is a book called Squire by Sarah Alfaghi and Nadia Shamas. It is a book that is set in a time similar to in a world similar to parts of history for the Turkish Ottoman Empire. If I'm not mistaken, it's still, detached from that historical world, but it is set in a world that is a very similar structure. The main character is a young girl who wants to become a citizen in the world that she finds herself, but understands that the path to citizenship is enrollment in the military structure of her land, and squiredom and knighthood are the means of truly becoming a citizen. However, she encounters discrimination based on who she is, and starts to understand that the power structures in place in the empire that she finds herself a part of need to be dismantled because they are toxic, because they are harmful to people like her and her family. And so as a result, we see again the crumbling from within of this empire and military structure with this girl at the centerpiece. She wants to be loyal to herself, her family, but understands that that is in direct conflict with the empire that she finds herself a part of. So definitely something I would have as unit focuses, most certainly civil disobedience. How do we essentially challenge these structures that we find ourselves part of when we are dissatisfied or in conflict with what our communities stand for? How do we challenge those things, and in what ways? The way that our main character in Squire challenges those is often through conflict and violence, but we can most certainly bring in other texts and other ideas to show where civil disobedience is a means of change. So definitely I would have that be one of their focuses. I would also talk about how identity works on both the micro and macro levels. So, looking at how the main character constructs their identity as an individual, despite being essentially a cog in the larger militaristic machine, but then also figuring of, this massive empire, how she, her people, which are often discriminated against or seen as traitors or enemies within this structure, how again you can be identified based on your larger identity, a cultural identity. So looking at those things again, having students be reflective on how they fit into the structures and how they can both be part of something larger, but then also stand out as someone unique within that structure as well. Definitely, I think it hits a lot of the beats of your hero's journey. So, plenty of things you can bring in that fit that mold, and you can hit those beats. And that's very much a kind of plug and chug of what is your ideal version of the hero's journey that you might want to have your students compare with that. But I think this is fits nicely into that structure and hits those beats. The big thing I would say as my assessment, my endpoint for a text like this is really having students look outward and start to consider how they are functioning members of the societies and the cultures that they find themselves a part of. And, something from the injustice of, a lack of voice being heard to, discrimination in terms of housing or discrimination in terms of any practices that we find in the structures of our society. How do we challenge those structures? How do we make change in those structures? And certainly, bringing that back to civil disobedience is what are the practical ways that we could change the world that we live in? And what does it mean to, in Squire, one of the ways to become a citizen is that you have to be either a member of the military, and there's different statuses of citizen, but certainly looking at a knight is the one of the higher status symbols. With that being said, still looking at, well, these are these status symbols, but how do we still make sure that we are contributing members of our society How do we make sure that we are building as well as perhaps dismantling things that need to be dismantled? So it's all about students, again, figuring out what is their place in the world. How do they address things that they feel are injustices? How do they change those things for the better? And how do they also make sure that they are contributing to a more positive future? So I think it's very much identifying who they are, how they fit into places, and what is the world that they want to create based on what they're identifying as problems with the world. So, definitely looking at my two picks, Step by Bloody Step is leaning into the more technical side, where I think this leans into more of the larger ideas of a text like Squire and how that extends into our students' personal lives. And with that, I will throw it over to Michael for his second pick.
So many books to read. I mean, I've read Squire, but you guys are recommending some that I haven't gotten to, and I don't know where I'm going to find the time to read all these books, but I know I'm going to have to figure out a way. So my last book is actually kind of appropriate that it would follow Squire, because it too has a lot of this very similar themes and ideas, and I'm trying hard to look directly into the camera while I talk to you, because I'm not used to that, and I know I've been looking down most of this time, so I'm going to try to address the camera directly, but I can't tell if I'm doing that because my picture is over here on the left. But anyway, so what I've chosen is a book called Red Scare by Scholastic, Liam Francis Walsh. And it's essentially a story post-World War II America, and there's aliens, and these two young middle school, high school age kids, the brother and sister, along with a friend, find themselves kind of embroiled in this very interesting and science fiction-y plot where they're being chased by a number of different entities, including the FBI. And it's during the time post-World War II when McCarthyism was on the rise. And we had this constant fear, as the title would suggest, of a communist kind of invasion of our country. And when that paranoia took hold in the US, we saw people's lives destroyed by a simple accusation. So this unit, the main character, she has polio, or she's getting over polio, I should say. So she's struggling with mobility, as you could see from the cover photo there. In addition, their father is a Korean War veteran who has PTSD and is an amputee. So he's struggling with depression at the same time. So it takes on the concept of what was going on in the country, in the late 40s, early 50s, and not just, the simple things like, the idea of, the nuclear family, but it also discusses what war, the toll war can take on an individual and families that are affected by it, as well as, how, kind of crazy things got when people got very afraid of what the potential for new enemies post-World War II, communist enemies, could potentially do, and the unrealistic nature of how people dealt with that. And like I said, there's also this whole alien thing that's going on. The main character finds a kind of a red colored rod, which allows her to fly. I mean, literally to fly. And that's where the science fiction comes in. So she struggles with, this newfound freedom, but is also, realizing that this is isolating her from others, and she's being chased by a number of different people. I don't want to give too much away in terms of the origin of the rod and what happens at the end of the book, because it is a pretty interesting and exciting read. But there's a whole lot going on that is kind of couched in this witch hunt, fear, and this political odd and aggressive political climate. So you could focus this on a unit if you were doing I know it's kind of an old school, canonical kind of maybe tried and true, tired even for some, but the Crucible always comes to mind when we talk about witch hunts as kind of an allegory for McCarthyism, that If you were teaching this or had to teach the Crucible, I know some districts and some schools require that, usually a 10th, 9th, or 10th grade curriculum. This could be a great companion text for that, which gives the students, if you're reading this play about the witch hunts, you could pull out this book as a really cool, almost superhero-esque comic with a sci-fi bent that touches on a lot of the same themes, and you can easily crosswalk some of those themes from one text to the next. Also, if you're a history teacher and you're teaching this period in history, this is a really cool way to kind of introduce it to maybe some students that are not as eager to embrace just the historic side of it, but giving them a piece of literature that's fun and interesting and fantastic, that they might be able to understand some of what was actually happening during that time. For assessments, again, it's not like paranoia and witch hunts have gone away. We've seen it time and time again, continuously, where politics and politicians utilize and demonize, segments of the population, culturally, racially, in terms of religion, whatever, is going on in the world, in order to control how people feel and think and to move forward politically, much like McCarthy did in the 50s. So, I mean, you could easily tie in what's going on in the world today at any given time as part of that whole witch hunt theme. And you could have students take a look at what's going on in their world, in our world, I should say, and maybe draw their own mini comics or short stories, however you want to approach it, where they talk about witch hunts that are happening now, and how that might manifest in a world that they can create for themselves. So, this book is really interesting. It's a great throwback to comics of the 50s. It has that same kind of artistic style that you might have observed in older books written in the 50s and 60s. Some of those older artists, the more simpler art, but you've got a very complex story at the same time, which is kind of cool. So, and again, we can also discuss something as rudimentary as like the hero's journey, like Adam mentioned as well. There's that happening here as well, as Peggy, the main character Peggy, she tries to kind of cope with her own limitations as because of her illness, and then is suddenly freed from that, but for how long, and get to see her kind of develop and change, and then have to kind of find her way back to the path, that is a little bit more, I don't know, I want to use the term right, but the right way. She has to do things the right way, and sometimes that means sacrificing. So that's all I have to say about this book. So I'll throw it back to our host Adam to, I guess, wrap us up. Yeah.
Yeah, folks. And again, a lot of times what this, the shape that this panel or this presentation can take is often like a deluge of books that are kind of rapid fire and rattled off so quick that it's sometimes hard to take notes. But I think, one of the strengths of essentially what's been brought to the table here are 6 books with, I think, some great ideas of how to either bring them into new units or bring them into pre-existing units, and really show, the skills that you're having students focus on, in addition to just experiencing the narratives and ideas of these books. So we'll get in our quick plugs. Where you can find me on the internet is on the YouTube. You can find me on youtube.com. Just search Adam Ebert, Can I Teach It? And you'll find plenty of resources in which, like I said, I talk about how you can bring various pop culture into your classroom. Michael, where can they find you on the internet?
The best place to find me is on Twitter, at Trying Teacher. That's TRYING, and then the word teacher. That's where I probably do the most, and you can get links to other things that I'm doing from there as well.
And Adan, where can they find you on the internet?
Instagram, teach_dopeness. Yeah, I do post a lot of art, but I also post a lot of stuff about, the text and graphic novels and short stories and poems I really dig and like to bring into the classroom. So check it out, teach_dopeness.
All right, folks. And again, thank you for stopping by and listening to our discussion. That was the Can I Teach It 2022 edition as part of the Comics in the Classroom 2022 virtual conference put on by Reading with Pictures. Again, thank you for your time, and we hope to see you all soon. Take care.
Thank you.